My name is Brent Toderian. My company is called Toderian Urban Works, which I started about a year ago in Vancouver after 6 years as Vancouver's chief planner, as the director of city planning for Vancouver. Before that, I was the manager of Centre City Planning and Design for Calgary. So I planned for both the most right-wing city in Canada and the most left-wing city in Canada, so I understand how to speak both languages. I've been a consultant for 9 years before that, and now I do work all over the world. Working for Canadian cities and some progressive developers who want to do very good things, but increasingly working for international cities like Sydney and Oslo and Helsinki and such. I'm not one who pragmatically says that the suburbs are going to stop. I don't try to stop the suburbs. I think that's a relatively futile effort on people's part. I think suburbia will continue. But I think it has to be much smarter than it's been in the past. And I think we have powerful information, powerful data, the right math increasingly being done about the costs of sprawl, the full costs, the life cycle costs, and even the uncountable things, the things that are hard to count, that really are showing us the consequences of doing suburbia poorly. And so I think we can do the suburbs better. I don't necessarily think that the suburbs are going to stop. Sprawl is about car dependency. It's about designing the suburbs in a way where no other way of getting around is viable, let alone attractive. And that's how we've been designing a lot of suburbia. So not all suburbs are sprawl, but far too much of them are. If you design suburbia that still accommodates the car, because it's not going away quickly, but makes other modes of transportation at least equally attractive, walking, biking, and transit, at least equally attractive, so that they have at least a level playing field. I actually believe we should prioritize walking, biking, and transit. And ironically, that makes driving easier because it actually frees up car space for drivers, because walking, biking, and transit takes less space. If we just design our suburbs to at least put them on an equal playing field, that would be a transformation of suburbia, because certainly that's not what we've been building since the late 1960s. We've been building a place where you almost are considered irrational if you try to exist in suburban environments without multiple vehicles. I think statements like that are actually not very helpful, because that immediately gets the suburbanites back up and say, I care about my neighborhood. I have my barbecue out on my front driveway, and I talk to my neighbors, and I care about my school, and I contribute to my community center. How dare you say I don't care about it? Classic example of Jim, I think, overstating more than he needs to say, and he actually loses an audience that he could potentially influence. Urbanists, not just Jim, but urbanists in general, and I've been guilty of this, can have a tendency to sort of turn their nose down at the suburban choice. And all that does is get people to respond that they say, well, where's your job? And how many kids do you have? And it's easy for you to say. And suddenly, that's not the right kind of conversation. I don't tell suburbanites that they're wrong, that they're soulless, that they don't care about their community, because they will come right back at me and say, I will never want to live downtown. And you're wrong for choosing downtown. It's kind of a useless argument. For me, the point is to, first of all, do the real math and calculate the true costs of our choices. And frankly, we've been subsidizing suburbia and sprawl for a long time. So I think the true math has to be done. The true consequences of choices need to be discussed. And we need to facilitate options for people. And then I think most of the time when people have the right information, the right costs associated with their choices, they'll make rational choices. And certainly we're seeing this in the new generations, the millennials and such, who don't want driver's license and who would rather live in urban environments where they can walk, bike, and take transit. Certainly I'm very enthusiastic, obviously, about the renaissance of cities, the great inversion, the idea that ironically, causing some affordability challenges and gentrification challenges, you have the middle class and the millennials and the hipsters and such, either rediscovering or in some cases for the first time discovering the merits of urban living and the lifestyle choice and the health choice and the affordability choice of living in walkable, transit-friendly, bikeable communities. Transit has replaced location. I was reading something to say that homes near transit is equivalent to beachfront property now. That has both its strengths and weaknesses. On the one hand, that means the market is embracing choices that have lower footprints and are more responsible choices. At the same time, now they're really expensive. And that can be a challenge. But frankly, when you look at the whole costs of choices, like transportation costs being reduced, they're not as expensive as they sometimes initially appear. But don't kid yourself. Auto-oriented suburban development is still continuing massively out there. And it's continuing to be subsidized by the American and Canadian government through the building of infrastructure and various tax incentives, etc. Remember, the stat was something like $40 billion a year subsidized by the US government, essentially suburban development. Eco-density was about the densification of the city, strategic densification in a not a one-size-fits-all approach, but a very strategic approach. We introduced terms like gentle, hidden, and invisible density to describe how you could add people, add neighbors to existing neighborhoods that would add flexibility and diversity in those neighborhoods, but not without mid-rise or definitely not high-rise buildings. On the one hand, it was about empowering strategic densification and igniting transit-oriented development all the way down to ideas like more secondary suites and laneway houses. On the other side, the eco part, first of all, density in itself is inherently eco if you design it well and mix it well, etc. But we raised our green design standards. The developers all wanted the density but didn't want to do greener buildings. The community said, make them do greener buildings, but don't let them do any more density. And I showed how you needed to do both. The combination of increasing density and increasing green standards, powerful. It's a 1 + 1 = 5 kind of scenario. And by the way, eco-density was also about economic density, and it was about making sure that the city had the resources to pay for amenities and rental housing and social housing and such. We leveraged density to pay for those things, all of which within a pattern that's extremely economically successful, both for the city and for developers. So much so that when the global downturn hit, we were the last city to be affected, the first to recover, and really the least affected of any city in North America. So very strong, resilient economics. Dogma. That's all that is, dogma. And I don't have much time or tolerance for what I call height dogma. I work with Jan Gale now. We team up on things. He and I have been friends for years, and we agree on most things. He's a mentor to me about walkable urbanism, bikeable urbanism, etc. But I think there is an overstatement about scale equals quality of life. Anyone who thinks you can't have life above that many stories needs to get out more and needs to, frankly, come and visit downtown Vancouver. And again, tell people in downtown Vancouver that they don't have a great quality of life. In Vancouver, we take the benefits and strengths of mid-rise, the things that Alan and Alan Jacobs and Jan Gale like, the sort of 2-story, 3-story, all the way up to 8-story kind of mid-rise. And we combine that with the advantages of the tower. It's the podium and tower model, literally towers on top of mid-rise. So the human scale gets established by the mid-rise. The urban room, the height to width ratio, the golden ratio that allows sunlight access and a good feeling of enclosure gets created by the mid-rise. The walkability gets created by the mid-rise. And then the towers are separated and stepped back, and they aren't the dominant effector of your walking experience, frankly. But they add the density that makes it even more vital. And to say that anyone who chooses to live in the tower instead of choosing to live in the mid-rise isn't enjoying life, people in downtown Vancouver would laugh at you for that. And it's so patronizing. And if you ask Jan, the most logical rationale for that height is the idea that you can look down and have a direct relationship with the street. And the anecdote is that a mother could recognize the face of the child from the street. Now that's important and good for us for thinking about that relationship. Jan has given us an awareness of that connection, which is important. But does that mean it trumps every other issue when we're thinking about densification. You know, that tower also supports transit to a high degree, significantly lowers the carbon footprint, and frankly protects the future of that child that is maybe playing down on the street and maybe not. So I think it's something you factor in, but people have taken that observation, which is an interesting one, and have it trump everything else in the consideration of urbanism, which I find unsophisticated. At a certain point, the success of housing in a hot market like ours starts to push out other uses. It started to potentially push out the growth potential of office space in our CBD. So we put a freeze on housing in the CBD, not in the downtown, which is much larger, but the central business district, which is much smaller. I certainly championed rules to protect the CBD. And as soon as we solidified those rules and stopped the residential speculation, we had a boom of office applications and now construction. We were doing more than any other city in at least Canada because we had actually missed a 7-year cycle of office construction because people were holding out for higher profitability for residential housing. 10% of the land area of the city of Vancouver didn't allow housing. Only 10% are industrial land, the False Creek Flats, etc. But half the jobs were on that 10% of land. An incredibly important land base for our economy. So incredibly important part of a complete city, but if you listen to the residential developers, well, the smart thing to do is just build housing in those. And then we would get more and more as a resort city, as a bedroom community, where ironically people have to commute out to get to the jobs. If you listen to people like Jeff Rubin, the economist Jeff Rubin in the book Why Your World is About to Get a Whole Lot Smaller, there's already happening as we speak a relocalization of manufacturing as the fundamental assumptions of globalization change. Transportation costs, cheap energy being the number one assumption for globalization. So the cities that are resilient and flexible, more flexible than resilient, that have the ability to accommodate a relocalization of jobs in the future will win. The job of planning is to look ahead, knowing we don't know exactly what will happen, but we need to build in the flexibility for whatever happens and to skate to where the puck's going to be. Right now, I think too many cities are giving up on their industrial land that are still viable because they've got a gleam in their eye around sexy mixed-use projects that look really cool. And frankly, Vancouver has made its reputation based on sexy mixed-use projects. So sometimes you can let it go, and we did let some go that I think properly was let go, but then we said stop. And frankly, if we had let more go, it would have been a big mistake. You could extend that logic and say that no planning rules at all would theoretically make everything affordable. It probably would, because the city would be crap. Affordability challenges are the consequence of success. It's not the consequence of planning, except that we've planned a city that people want to be in. On the one hand, constraining supply will always affect prices if demand is high. So yes, that's a basic law. But the answer isn't to have your supply be unconstrained, done poorly, build unlivable cities. And by the way, erode your land base, your agricultural land. You know, folks like Wendell always say, well, build housing in the agricultural land reserve, for example. But that undermines our ability to be a successful city in the future in terms of getting food to our city. Build in the industrial land because it's cheaper and the industry could come in and build cheaper houses. But then where are the jobs? So frankly, I've never been that impressed with the analysis. I think it's simplistic and true enough just to get somebody's attention, usually the media, which is his actual goal, to get media attention and to manufacture doubt about smart growth in the same way that the oil companies manufacture doubt about climate change in order to do what oil companies do. If you've designed and planned a great city and it makes more people want to come there, yes, that has implications for affordability. But frankly, Vancouver, more than any other city I've seen, tries to leverage that market success and actually use it to try to come back around and facilitate and help affordability. We create incentive programs for rental housing. 20% of our units have to be, our unit potential has to be set aside for social housing so that you can have a social mix. I haven't seen any other city that does as much as we do around affordability. It's, in a way, it's leveraging the market success that is ironically creating the affordability challenge and at least using it to try to create some diversity of housing. But the only thing that would cause prices to substantially come down is some sort of crash. And that has other implications and not necessarily good news. Or, you know, there's lots of cities out there that aren't very attractive and thus they are very affordable. But that's not us.